Now let's process the same data, but let's use the first in, first out method, which again, that first in, first out method separates out the cost as per direct materials and conversion cost. And if we compare these equivalent unit prices over time from one period to another, using the FIFO method helps us to be able to see a change, where the weighted method, the change is not as evident due to the fact that we're averaging costs together. So, using the same data, plotting in the physical units yet again, 1,500 brought over into our work in process for this period, so that's our beginning work in process number, and started during this current period a total of 8,500, which if we add those two together gives us 10,000 total to account for. Now, regarding the units, and we're trying to itemize them as to when they were started so that we can show first in, first out. Therefore, the 1,500 work in process beginning units are going to be kept on a separate line item under the first in, first out method, instead of being lumped together with units that were started and completed in this period. So, the 1,500 beginning work in process physical units are 1,500 physical units that we are going to separate out. We were told that we had 7,000 units completed and transferred out in the period. 1,500 of those came from a prior period. Then that means 7,000 minus 1,500 equals 5,500 that had to be started and completed in this period. So go ahead and plug in those two numbers right there. Let's go ahead and just finish the physical units, and then we'll do the equivalent units next. In regards to the work in process, we were also told that we had 2,000 units remaining in our work in process, so we need to put in the 2,000 there. And we know we've got 10,000 total to account for. If we take the 10,000 and we subtract 1,500 and 5,500 as well as 2,000, we still end up with the 1,000 spooled units. We were told that we had an expectation of 10% allowed as normal spoolage, and that 10% is applied to the 7,000 units that were completed and transferred out, which is made up of the 1,500 and the 5,500. So 7,000 times 0.10 means 700 units are considered normal spoolage. If we take 1,000 total spoolage minus 700 normal spoolage allowed, that will give us a remaining number of 300 that had to be our abnormal spoolage quantity. Now, as to our direct materials and our conversion cost, recall that we do step 2 just a touch different in our FIFO method than we do with our weighted method because of the way that we do step 3 and 4 and 5. So as to our beginning work in process, those 1,500 units were allocated their direct materials in a prior period. And the way that we go about assigning the cost, we keep the FIFO direct materials and the FIFO conversion costs separate. So as to direct materials, because those 1,500 units got it in the prior period, we're going to give them 0%. So 1,500 times 0% equals 0 as to direct materials. In regards to those units, however, in regards to conversion cost, they had told us that those units were only 60% converted. Therefore, we have got to complete them the rest of the way. And we're going to do that in this period. Therefore, we've got to finish those 1,500 units the rest of the way, which would be 40%. Here they've got it written out as 100 minus 60%. So 1,500 times 0.4 equals 600 equivalent units as to conversion cost for those beginning WIP items. In regards to those additional 1,500 to complete out our 7,000 total, they were started in this period. They get 100% as to direct materials and 100% as to conversion cost. So 5,500 times 100% equals 5,500 in direct materials, 5,500 in conversion costs. Again, we're applying 100% direct materials on the spoolage units and 100% as to conversion cost per the assumptions and instructions for this particular entity. Therefore, the equivalent units for the normal spoolage is going to be 700 times 100% equals 700. 700 times 100% equals 700. And the abnormal units, the same deal, 300 times 100% as to direct materials and to conversion cost. And then lastly, the work in process. Again, they were started in this period. They are going to get 100% of their 2,000 as to direct materials. So 2,000 times 100% equals 2,000. And then as to their conversion costs, they've only been converted 50% of the way. So 2,000 times 0.5 equals 1,000. I want to take a second to draw your attention to these two conversion issues that we see here, because this is some of the mistakes that I tend to see in regards to Chapter 18. Back up to the beginning work in process. Notice that we said those units were 60% complete when the prior period ended. So we are converting them the rest of the way. Okay, so 1,500 times the extra 40% they need in order to be finished. This down here is telling us that we only finish them 50% of the way. So we're halfway there. Alright, so they were completed the rest of the way 40%. These were only completed up to 50%. So I want you to think about that for just a moment. Make sure you understand that we're having to separate it out, and we're looking at what it took to get these converted the rest of the way in this period, and this is to the extent these were also converted this period. Alright, we still total everything up the same way. If we were to take the 1,500 plus the 5,500 plus the 700, 300, and 2,000, we have actually accounted for 10,000 units. And as long as you've done your work correctly, your direct materials equivalent units and your conversion cost equivalent units will be used in steps 3, 4, and 5. So, totaling those up, we've got 8,500 in direct materials and 8,100 equivalent units as to conversion cost. We can then move forward to step 3. Alright, we had work in process beginning. Recall that we are doing the FIFO method, and we're going to consider that those costs invested in a prior period, we're going to separate those out. You do see that we're adding them together here in step 3 to give us the total cost to account for. However, when we go about calculating our equivalent units, price per unit, we will not be including the work in process beginning dollars for direct materials and conversion cost. We're going to wait to use those line 31 numbers until we get down to step 5. Okay, so 21,000 total, made up of 12,000 and 9,000 brought over from the prior period as to our work in process. Then we've got our line 32 that shows us the cost added in the current period. Same numbers we've been using from the text, 76,500 and 89,100 for a total of 165,600. If we total each one of those sets of numbers up, we've got a total cost to account for of 186,600, which again we're going to be comparing that when we get to the bottom down here to make sure that we have divvied that up and have the same total. 88,500 is the total of our direct materials. 98,100 is the total of our conversion cost. These two numbers will also be check figures for the last line to make sure that we have gotten everything where it needs to go. Step 4, again, FIFO, it's a little bit different. We're only looking at our cost added in the current period. Ignore the beginning WIP numbers for this part in order to calculate cost per equivalent unit. 76,500 in this current period and 89,100 as to conversion in this current period. Dividing by our equivalent units from step 2 for direct materials and as to conversion costs give us $9 and $11 per unit. Moving on to step 5, we need to assign the cost all the way. Recall that we have a total of 7,000 units that are completed and transferred out. 1,500 of those are considered our first in, first out units, and we're going to take care of those first by doing two things. First, we're going to get the cost that came with them from the prior period, 12,000 and 9,000, and plot them in, total them up. It is 21,000. And then we're going to take their equivalent units as to direct materials and as to conversion costs for this period from step 2 and use the equivalent units and multiply the cost added to them for this period. Now, think back to the fact that we had a 0 in equivalent units as to direct materials because those units were given all of their direct materials in a prior period. So they're getting a 0 in this cell. Recall also that those units were 60% of the way. We're finishing them the remaining 40%. 1,500 times 0.4 gave us equivalent units of 600. So 600 equivalent units at 11 would give us our number of 6,600 that would go in this cell. Therefore, 6,600 plus 0 equals 6,600, which is our cost added to beginning work in process in current period. Adding those two numbers together gives us 27,600 to the beginning inventory units before we do anything about normal spoilage. We do need to go ahead and continue with our good units completed. We had a total of 7,000. 1,500 of them came from beginning. Therefore, we've got those remaining 1,500 units. Or excuse me, 5,500 units, sorry. 5,500 units. And again, they were started in this period and they were completed in this period. That means they got full 100% as to direct materials and a full 100% as to conversion cost. So 5,500 times 100%, then times their relative cost per equivalent unit, 9 and 11, putting those numbers in the cells and then adding them up would give us $110,000. Next, we've got normal spoilage. We've got normal spoilage of 700 units. Again, if you were to go back to step 1, we calculated out the fact that we had 1,000 total units, and that this particular company, management expects 10% in normal spoilage. So it's an expectation, it's okay, it's within their parameters. So for each 100 units that were good, we would expect 10 additional units that would be spoiled. So 7,000 good units times 10% gave us 700 units of normal spoilage. They too were considered to be started and finished in this particular period. Again, 100% as to direct materials and as to conversion cost. So 700 times 9 and 700 times 11, filling in those two cells, and then totaling it up, would have their normal spoilage value 14,000. And again, we're putting that normal spoilage number in with our good units and coming up with a total. So 27,600 for the first in, first out ones, 110,000 for the additional 5,500 units, and then the spoiled units of 14,000. Adding those numbers together, we get 151,600. And that is the number we would use in order to move these good units out of work in process and onto another work in process or finished goods inventory, depending on what we're doing, if they had to be processed on in another department. As per the abnormal spoilage issue, again, we want to have it broken out separately so that we can show it to management and hopefully take care of this going forward. We had 300 units, again 100% as to direct materials and 100% as to conversion cost. So 300 times 100% equals 300, both times their cost per equivalent unit of 9 and 11. Taking those numbers, plotting them in the cells, and then adding them up, those abnormal spoilage units cost our company $6,000. And then lastly, the work in processing units, we had 2,000 units total. They were given 100% of their direct materials in this period, so 2,000 times 100% equals 2,000. Multiplying that times its cost per equivalent unit of 9 gives us that particular number. And then as to conversion, recall they were only converted 50% of the way in this period. So 2,000 times 0.5 equals 1,000. 1,000 times 11 would be a number that we would plot into that box. Adding those two cells side by side together would give us a total of ending work in process inventory as to this particular process or this particular department of 29,000. Adding our numbers up, we've got 151,600 including normal spoilage for our total cost of good units completed and transferred out, plus the 6,000 for the abnormal spoilage units, plus 29,000 left in work in process ending, giving us a total cost accounted for of 186,600, which of course matches our number up here. If we were to take all of these sales and their respective numbers and total them up, we would get 88,500, and for here we would also get 98,100, using these numbers to verify that we have in fact covered all the direct materials to date and all of the conversion costs to date that needed to be accounted for. I will stop here and pick back up on the last part of this chapter in another video.